This is the third meeting of our working group on open science infrastructures. So thanks very much for joining again. And as you can see from the agenda here on the screen, we have a fairly simple agenda for this morning. We'll start with a very brief background and quick overview, and then the main part of the meeting will be kicked off with a presentation and discussion on the draft index of the open science knowledge sharing platforms, and that will be followed by discussions really on the next steps for the working group. So a fairly simple agenda. So without further ado, if we can please move, we'll just go on the background and update. Now, those of you who've participated in these meetings before will have seen this. So just for those who maybe have joined just for this first one, or just as an overview. So this this meeting, this working group meeting, is in the context of the implementation of open science, the recommendation. And as you see, we've set up 5 working groups on capacity building, policies and strategies, financing incentives, monitoring framework, and this specific working group on open science infrastructures. Next slide, please. And just really to touch on or to remind ourselves of the objectives of the working group. And that's to jointly produce and come up with a checklist or guide for open science infrastructures in line with the recommendation on open science. And also an index on open science infrastructures, supporting the sharing of knowledge and information in UNESCO science priority areas, which is the priority areas of diversity, climate change, disaster risk reduction, geosciences, earth science, oceans, and water. And if we look at some of the key questions which we've addressed or that have been discussed by the working group during our previous meetings in July, 7th of July and 30th of September last year. And these main issues or main questions that we were discussing were: what are the main international, regional and thematic open science platforms for sharing of knowledge and best practices, specifically in UNESCO's priority areas, which I just mentioned? Which are the gaps in the open science infrastructures? What are the barriers to the interoperability of research infrastructures, as well as collaborative and multilingual infrastructures? What are the challenges and opportunities of cross-border multi-stakeholder collaboration on development and use of open science, of shared open science infrastructures? And then really, what are the existing approaches for efficiently and effectively funding and maintaining such infrastructures, and who are the key actors responsible for that? So in terms of the outcomes or the things that the working group has produced or come up with, we have the guide for bolstering open science infrastructures for all, and that's part of the open science toolkit, which a bit blurred to show you, but we'll come back to that. So as part of that, and if you haven't got it, there'll be information at the end of where you can get hold of this particular document on infrastructures, but also the entirety of the toolkit as it is. And the main content, the main area for discussion today is this compilation of thematic open science knowledge sharing platforms, or what we're calling the infrastructures index. So this will be the main discussion today. And then, of course, the reports of the meetings. So previous meetings will be available. You can use a QR code here, or at the end of this working group, we'll put up on the screen their website, the email address and QR codes and so on, so you can easily access all that information. So with that very brief overview and introduction, I'd now like to please pass the floor to my colleague, Tiffany Straza, who will give us a presentation on the Open Science Knowledge Sharing Index. Thank you.
Thank you, Ezra. Let me just adjust. Now I hope that you should be the same slide showing up. Here we go. Yes, so thank you again to everyone for joining us, and special thanks to those who've contributed suggestions for content for this index. Let me first start off with why we created this. Ezra mentioned the guidance document that was created with the contributions of you in this working group on what we should do to support open science infrastructures around the world. And that's taking information from the recommendation, so what countries have decided needs to be done to support infrastructures, as well as additional guidance and context and suggestions from this working group. And there's 2 points that I wanted to pull out from that guidance today. The first was in order to make sure that we are ensuring that everyone has access to these infrastructures and to share our attention and the benefits more equitably, there was this important step of strengthening dissemination and awareness of what is already out there in terms of open science infrastructures, including knowledge sharing platforms. And this is tied in with interoperability, making sure that the information is reusable itself, and also that the infrastructures, the way that they're built and the way that they're shared is cooperative. And we also saw this focus on improving the findability of non-English information. We have a tendency to know what we already know, and that we can take advantage of this new way of working openly and interoperably to increase those connections between languages and make sure that we have information that is more broadly shared. So taking that, I hope that sparks a lot of ideas of what can be done to support open science infrastructures and to support open science more broadly. But our little contribution to begin with here was this index of knowledge sharing platforms in the 6 themes of our natural sciences sector. So we looked at open science infrastructures that share data or publications or other materials or ways of working, such as a mapping tool, based on these themes of biodiversity, climate change, disaster risk reduction, geosciences, geological sciences and earth science, and ocean sciences, as well as water. So this is hydrology and so on. We have a total of 43 platforms. We've added some and we've removed some since the last version of this draft index that you saw. And these are selected based on their relevance, but also whether they were multinational, relevant across multiple regions, whether the data was interoperable and there were multiple data sets working together and the tool worked together. We also looked for multilingualism and made sure that they aligned with the elements of open science as defined in the recommendation on open science. We also selected or did not select certain platforms to share based on their sustainability. We wanted to try to avoid platforms that are under, let's say, a 2 or 3 year project, but might not have a long-term lifespan. We recognize that that is one of the major challenges for infrastructures that are developed. And so we wanted to give a bit of a balance there, make sure that we're presenting things that will be around. As far as what we are presenting within each theme, we've tried to make it a little bit even here. So there are 8 platforms for biodiversity, 7 for each of climate change, disaster risk reduction, and water sciences, 6 for geology and earth science, and 8 for ocean sciences. As far as which languages are served, we tried to focus on those that were multilingual. You'll see that these sum up to more than 43 platforms because of multiple platforms being presented in more than one language, sometimes in all of the languages. I think we can think of GBIF as a good example where there's multiple languages that you can browse the platform within. And of course, it can, when we refer to language here, we're looking at the language with which you can engage on the platform, and sometimes it will direct you to information that is in an additional language. For technical reasons, we don't have the actual web version ready to share with you just yet. It will be coming very soon. So what we did today was we sent you a document, which I will switch over to right now. You should have received by email, and I believe Anna will be sharing in the chat. We've sent you a mock-up of the platforms that we have selected to be listed in this first edition of the index. So you can see For example, for biodiversity, I'm sure that these are familiar names to many of you. We've given you the name and the link and a very short description, which will be what appears on the index. And again, the index is designed to send people off to these platforms as a way to lead them into this literature and these infrastructures. If I jump down to climate change, again, this is probably familiar to many of you. We have things like the Climate Change and Human Health Literature Portal. So in this case, it's providing that bibliographic database of scientific articles. We also have things like an indicators dashboard, which is statistical tools that don't just give you a paper, but give you actual numbers to work with that you can use for analyses. Similarly, okay, we have the UNESCO Climate Change Knowledge and Science. This is one of our tool that our colleagues are working on. This has data as well as information and tools, and it links across other fields, which that multidisciplinarity is also important. In that case, we're linking earth sciences, biodiversity, and ocean sciences with climate change. I'm not going to read all of these, but I hope that you have some time. We'll be asking for your inputs over the next couple of weeks about what is represented here. But again, our goal was to try to give those users who are looking to UNESCO for open information in these scientific themes ways to access the literature, access data sets, and use those data sets to do things like create a map or engage with others to do this work. So with that, I'll jump back to the slides, please. And before I pass it over to Anna, actually, I'll just stop sharing. And I wonder if you have any comments or thoughts since we've had our previous meeting about this. I'd like to open the floor for discussion of this index and the contents. I know you've had, I hope, a chance to look at that Word document since it was emailed. So if you would like to raise your hand, and let me also check the chat for questions there. Sarita, please go ahead.
Hi, Anna. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Yeah, because the video is not accessible. So, yeah. Okay. Hi. Thank you for the invite. And yeah, when it comes to these days, we are having a lot of natural disasters like earthquakes, and we have tsunamis and other bio disasters. So how can we improvise infrastructures where we can prevent them? You know, what we are doing is disaster risk management is being deployed, but how can we alert I mean, like when we had in previous when we were like in school or something, we studied like a seismograph detects earthquakes. So we have improvised into satellite technology and everything, but still we can see that there's a lot of devastation that's been done. So how can we prevent? Because when it comes to especially when it comes to sustainability, prevention of this natural disasters is the need of the hour. Yeah. That's my question.
Very nice question. Thank you. And I apologize. I should have asked you to introduce yourself for the entirety of the group. So may I ask you to do that now?
It's Sarita Donti, an academician and scientific researcher and delegation of India to UNESCO and UNESCO chair. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a great question, Sarita. And I think that this is the exciting part of having this happen within the open science context, right? Because in order for disaster risk reduction, prevention, rather than management, we have to involve the entirety of society, yes? And so, again, taking it back to this infrastructure, the idea is to equip people with as much information as they need as early as they can get it. I hope that by providing these sorts of tools, but also that needs to be supported by in-country action to connect with this information and to give them a way to use it within their community. I think that's the way forward. I would love to hear if anyone.
Can I add one sentence, please? I know the time is. How can we? How can blue economy solve this?
Sorry, blue economy.
Can blue economy solve these problems a little bit? Like people, whenever we say disaster risk management, they say that it's a huge project and a lot of investment. So circular economy and blue economy, can they solve this? So that's how I wanted to know, Yeah.
Sure. I think, again, it's all connected. Yes. This is the idea of sustainable development, that we have to tie information across sectors and across activities. It's a great comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarita. And any other hands, or shall I go to the chat here? Let me check. Thank you, Sarita.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I'm not seeing other hands yet. Please do speak up if you would like to. And again, we'll be opening up for feedback on this index and other ideas that you have. You're more than welcome to submit those by email as well to openscience@unesco.com.org. Sorry. I see a question from Joe. Joe, would you like to speak out, or shall I introduce this question?
Sure. I can try. Keep the video off just because I'm not sure the connection is so stable. Okay.
Sure.
So I was just asking in the chat if you have the details, or if it's possible to capture the technical details of the databases that are already in use and have been in use for a while, and like just to look into eventually being able to deliver a level of interoperability also with the fair data sharing infrastructures we're building within academia. And like I've participated in a few concerned that other sectors have their own silo versions of fair sharing of data, but there's an increase of, or there's an opportunity here to bring all these systems together to build interoperability checkpoints. Yeah.
It's a really good
question
point,
do we have the capacity, or is this already in the scope of this of the listing? Sorry.
Yeah, that's the key question, isn't it? So I think you'll see from comparing our previous discussion to now, we've actually simplified, again, mostly for technical reasons and in terms of sustainability of keeping a list, keeping an index that functions over the long term. We have simplified what we're presenting. So we're really right now presenting the description, it fits within this theme, and then directing people to that external site rather than having a lot of characteristics about the infrastructures themselves. So again, there's that separate question. The question that we're addressing here is, where can I find open information and open tools in these scientific themes? And then separately, there is, what are the characteristics of the best open science infrastructures out there? How do I create one that is interoperable? How do I use a system that's forkable or that is community governed? What does that look like in practice? And I think that's a question for this group, again, is how much guidance needs to be created, and what are the ways in which this group wants to participate in developing that guidance for others if it doesn't already exist elsewhere. So the short answer is no, not quite for this list. This index doesn't have all of that technical information. But again, I think Anna is going to guide us into discussion later about what you think is still needed in terms of descriptions and case studies of open infrastructures. I can say that, for example, we are looking ahead to the reporting that countries will be doing against this recommendation to see what's happening in open science around the world. And within the report or descriptions that are coming out from that process, we would like to showcase what works, why, and how. And I will stop there because I see another hand. So I will see Lucas, and then I know that there are a couple other questions in the chat. So Lucas, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. So regarding your question with the all what we would need would be that the list that you just presented is offering us a clear connection point, because when we interact with such entities, we are not on their radar. So we, for 7 years, don't have any reply. So when there would be like a clear contact point dedicated to this goal of this working group and not just the official contact from the website, that would be a big step. So just showcase that there really someone cares about what we want to contribute to their activities, or like have basic questions and then that they are replied. So that would be like the greatest help. And sometimes the first step, the first biggest hurdle is already 80% of success. So it's just like, that's what we are fighting with from the ground up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucas. It's a great point, and one that I know our team has been thinking really hard about. How do we use our convening power to say that, look, these exist, this is the group who's already active. How can we connect meaningfully with them? So we'll be doing our best. I see Chris's hand as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tiffany. I to build off of what you just said, actually, I think that's really important, is building off of our convening, your convening power. I think really helping all these resources collaborate, because it's, we talked about sustainability. I think, the resources in this space, and I think everyone's strapped and like building these services, and, really there isn't so much money in open science. And so, what UNESCO can help us do is really bring some of these services together to work together. Like that's the hard thing, right? Like because we're not making, there's no money really. We're trying to do all this work for, very little money, free, volunteerism. And I think, just trying to bring us together, share these resources would really help everyone. And it's a difficult task. It really is, I know Irina pointed to the fact that there are like hundreds of repositories just for water and RE3 data. That's mind blowing, that's how many repositories, like how can we work together? It's so many, like how can we sort of, really, just make this more efficient for everyone.
Thank you, Chris. It's a wonderful comment. And you're right to point out the RE3 data or information that's available about repositories that exist. We also didn't want to step on the toes of others who are doing wonderful work in this area. For example, SCOS is, again, this is for the benefit of everyone on this call. I know these are familiar names for lots of our participants, but SCOS is looking at how to attract funding to open science infrastructures, and they have funded 8 infrastructures so far. They have nice descriptions of what those are and what they're doing. I also want to acknowledge the work done by Invest in Open. Again, you can look at investinopen.org and you can see their catalog of open science infrastructures, where they've taken the route of a very detailed analysis of infrastructures, but that has meant that they're starting with a small list, and I believe that they're expanding that as they go. So how can we all work together to again, connect with each other, not duplicate or not unnecessarily copy each other's work. Rather, let's be smart about our resources and make sure that we create partnerships. So thank you. I see there's a question in the chat about whether we can add to this index. Please do let us know of what you would like to add. Again, this index is not comprehensive, and we have kind of painfully had to remove certain things that are wonderful examples of working openly, but perhaps they were not multinational, perhaps they were tied to a specific project without a clear path for sustainability. So they were removed from this edition of the index, but clearly still valuable as ways to learn about how to do open science. Is there another hand? Let me quickly check the chat as well. Helios, yes. Thank you all for the links in the chat. That's wonderful. Joe is asking if the removed examples can be published separately. This is an interesting question. We are certainly able to share with the working group. I think the question remains how we should publicize those, particularly the risk with introducing a very large list is if we haven't been able to do our complete due diligence for hundreds of platforms where we're not quite sure what their sustainability is, or we're not quite sure how they're governed, for example. So I think that certainly we can share the list with the working group, but I think we'd have to have a bit of a discussion about how to present it and sustain a list publicly. But sure, Joe, we could share the list with you. Are there any other hands before I pass it to Anna, who's going to help us figure out where to take this forward to?
I see one more
Okay.
hand, Gareth.
Gareth?
Yeah, let's see if my audio is working. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you very well. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm a bit biased in some sense from the domains I work in, but I'm wondering to what extent there will or should be involvement or engagement or overlap with the current European Open Science Cloud that's now in development. And secondly, also in development in Europe are these common European data spaces, which in my understanding will be less open, so to speak. They would essentially be restricted to particular commercial sectors or commercial groups of organizations, where they could potentially be open within those groups, but not necessarily open for everybody, with of course a commercial content in mind. So if I just look at EOSC, for instance, the Open Science Cloud, the idea there is to build, starting within Europe in any case, a web of fair data, essentially fair digital objects, coupled with horizontal and thematic services that can be exploited and deployed across this web of fair data. With the idea being that this EOSC ultimately should be an open sort of infrastructure. I won't go into the depth there now, but in any case, with being a web of fair data, the data sets and services should certainly be findable, but potentially exploitable. With the ultimate goal being, of course, that this European cloud should link up to other clouds out there, be they regional or national or international. So I'm just wondering to what extent the work here should link up to that or involve that or separate from that. And that's an open question. I don't have an answer anyway.
Sure. Thank you, Gareth. It is exciting work, I have to say, yes. And a couple of thoughts come to my mind. One is, I think that there's value in tracking this as a case study. What does it take, particularly for a regional tool like this? What does it take to get the political buy-in to do this? What does it take to get the funding to do this? What kind of funding does this look like for, an infrastructure of this kind and this complexity and so on? I think that, and then the processes to build it, that's a very useful example for other regions that might be facing different contexts, different resource structures, and so on. So that's the first thought, is developing this as a case study. The other is, you mentioned interoperability. In looking at from the very technical perspective, what do we need to do when we are building our own systems to use at what level of community standards do we need to have, and what does that conversation look like to create those interoperabilities between things that function in a local context within a local system and then can speak to others at the regional or global level. I will pause there because I see Naomi's hand, and we'll perhaps come back to pieces of that in the later discussion. Naomi, please.
Thank you, Tiffany. Thanks very much for sharing this list of platforms with us. I'm Naomi, I'm at Invest in Open Infrastructure, and I'm interested to hear you talk about the things that didn't make the list and why. And I'm curious how you define and assess sustainability. I'm hearing this need to like think about platforms that last for the longer run, and that's obviously very relevant to IOI's work as well. So really curious to hear how you're looking at that.
Thank you. That question on sustainability, I might actually pass to Anna, if I may do that. But in terms of what built in this list, you're right, that we removed some from the previous listing and we've added a few. And again, the goal here was to really create the major ones as a window into this opportunity or to this thematic area. Anna, can I ask you to provide a comment about the sustainability perspective?
Sure. And it's very difficult indeed to, you know, make sure and be sure about the sustainability of these platforms. What we have done is simply understand, you know, what is kind of what is the support that the platforms are receiving. If we manage to see that there is like a plan, or that there is indeed some kind of sustained support for these particular platforms, then we would include it in the index. Those for which we were sure that, you know, the funding has ended and we saw that there is nothing happening after that, we just excluded those. So it's not like we did some very sophisticated, you know, analysis. It was really just to understand, to see, you know, where does the funding come from and for how long is it going, is it planned? And what is the type of resources that they are receiving. So you'll see it's most of these are actually these major platforms on these particular issues, which are of relevance for UNESCO. And the purpose of this index was really because our member states said, okay, we understand that there is a lot of platforms outside for sharing where we can access information. We don't know where they are. They are a little bit of everywhere. So please just help us make a little list of what is out there, where we can also point our scientists, researchers, etc., and policymakers. That was another thing. You will see in the list, many of them are also kind of targeting not just the researchers, but also policymakers. Hence the tools to make dashboards and others to kind of include the information that is there into some kind of scenario making or policy making, or something that would be useful for policy making as well. So that's a little bit the purpose of the index. It certainly, as we said, is not you know, conclusive or comprehensive, but is a starting point on these particular areas of what is out there that can be used by you know, stakeholders in different regions. And I think it's interesting also to see that there are I think we should in a second stage now have a look at all of these different platforms and have a separate kind of analysis of more information with regards to metadata related to these different platforms and the data sets that are in there. Also just to start coming up with some kind of, you know, real criteria lists for including for sustainability of this of the different open science infrastructures and how they actually should be, and how they can promote interoperability in the future. I think it's a great idea also to start thinking about how to link them. And if you have any particular ideas on how we could proceed with that, we'll be very happy to listen. And we also have an internal discussion to understand what can we do to make sure that there is more cooperation between these different platforms, and also with some grassroots platforms as well, as was mentioned by Lucas and the others in the meeting. I also see a little bit of discussion going on as for the role of AI, blockchains, etc. I think these are also very interesting issues that we can discuss further. I see Lucas has his hand up, so I'll pass it on to Lucas.
Yeah, I would like to raise two questions, as we've been talking now on both sides, on your sides and we as participants, two things. connections and partnerships. So I would like to raise the first question: what holds you, the UNESCO, back to get such connections and partnerships done? And then the second question would be like a little bit in the future, how do you ensure a stable scale of such
partnerships? Yeah, so I mean, what holds us back is what is in our work plans and what is being asked by our member states. So we have certain areas in which we have to focus, and we have these specific work plans that we have to work on in periods of 2 to 2 years. So it is important for us, the work of these working groups, to understand where the biggest challenges are and what the biggest priorities are, so that indeed we can include that into the work that we would want to present to the member states, and then the member states say, yes, you can work on that, or they say, no, we would prefer that you work on something else. So it's a question of prioritization with our member states, knowing again that the resources are scarce for everybody, including for the organization. But that's where, coming together is also very useful, because we can also build on each other's work and initiatives also. And in terms of providing additional platforms to this particular index, as Tiffany said, we will leave a little bit of time for you and also others to add some additional proposals. We'll have a look at them. And again, this index is not set in stone. It will evolve with time. We will also get, I'm sure, feedbacks from member states once we put it online, once we launch it. I hope we will be launching it in May during the executive board here in Paris. So it's meant to evolve in time, and we can always add platforms to it as well. Good. Is there any other question or any other suggestion?
I don't think so. I've seen some good
No?
conversation and links in the chat. So thank you everyone for sharing your information. So I think, yeah, with that, I'd pass it to you, Anna, for the next part of the discussion.
Yeah, and I think it's great, because we actually already touched upon a little bit what we wanted to discuss with you in this meeting. And that is, as Ezra said before, we've had like 2 main objectives for this working group. One was to come up with the guidance on open science infrastructures, which we did as part of the toolkit. And again, many thanks to all of you who have contributed to the guidance. And then the other one was to create this index of knowledge sharing platforms, open science knowledge sharing platforms in the areas of UNESCO science priorities. So now the question is, where does the group go next? What else can we do? And we've had some questions that we wanted to discuss with you and see, where do you see the value added of UNESCO? Where do you see this group? And what could be the next steps for the group? So let me just share the presentation. It's just a couple of slides. So as Ezra said, we've, in the beginning of our conversations and in both of the meetings that we've held so far, we've put some of these questions in front of the group, and that's, what are the main international regional thematic open science platforms for sharing of knowledge in the areas of priority for UNESCO? What are the gaps in open science infrastructures? What are the barriers to interoperability of infrastructures, as well as the barriers to collaborative and multilingual infrastructures? Challenges and opportunities for cross-border multi-stakeholder collaboration, and also development on the development and use of shared open science infrastructures. And then what existing approaches exist to efficiently and effectively fund and maintain infrastructures, and what are the key actors? So we've responded to some of these questions. We've responded partially to the others. The ones in red, in terms of gaps, in terms of barriers, in terms of what what are the challenges and opportunities for better collaborations, including between the different infrastructures, funding and maintenance, sustainability. These have not necessarily been replied to, let's say, in depth in the work of the working group so far. And now the question is whether there is scope to do that in the future meetings and in some other documents or guides that could be provided through this working group. Some of the possible next steps for the working group is we've seen, and in the previous meetings also, the participants have told us, yes, it's interesting and important to have an index of this knowledge sharing platforms on specific themes, but it might also be interesting to actually map and have an index of open science infrastructures more broadly, those that really maintain open science practices. And we see that it might be of use to do some regional mapping of existing open science infrastructures. I know colleagues, Joe and others, have done so for Africa. I am sure that the similar work has been done also in other regions. We are aware of a similar mapping that has been done in Asia, but we are wondering whether, you know, there is, it would make sense to do such regional mappings, and then who would be the different partners who could help us in that, because of course from here, from Paris, we're not necessarily well equipped to do this regional mapping. Once we do have these mappings, then of course we would be able to do gaps analysis, which would be much more meaningful. Would there be scope again for some kind of a guide or some principles for how to enhance cross-border multi-stakeholder collaboration on the development and use of shared open science infrastructures? We have been mainly talking about digital infrastructures. What about physical infrastructures? The group has not really talked about physical infrastructures, and is there, would that be useful also in the context of the implementation of the recommendation and advancement of open science practices? We are also wondering ourselves, you know, what about SDGs related infrastructures, SDG Open Science Commons? We have just a little bit of time left for the achievement of SDGs, and clearly there is not enough progress made on most of the SDGs. So how can we use open science? How can we use open science infrastructures also to boost SDGs and the delivery of the SDGs and the Agenda 2030? This is also something that we were thinking about and wondering, you know, what the group thinks about it, and is there something that we could do together to advance open science infrastructures in the context of SDGs. Another question that we saw as important, and we've discussed this at the last meeting of our capacity building working group, is what are these needed skills and competencies related to infrastructure development and maintenance that should maybe be more specifically elaborated and then included into curricula, both for scientists and for engineers, researchers. What exactly are the skills that are needed for open science infrastructure development, maintenance, etc., and how then we could use that set of skills to include it into a broader open science skills and competencies framework that we do need to develop as part of the implementation of the recommendation, because one of the requirements, one of the actions in the recommendation was precisely around skills and competencies framework development for its inclusion into curricula. Again, any other ideas are also welcome. So from the group, what would be a useful role for UNESCO? Again, in the context of the implementation of the recommendation, and what are some of the maybe feedback on some of these proposals from the group. I think that would be very, very useful for us to understand where we can go next, where we can take the group, and what should be our next priority. So I think yes, my presentation will stop here. I might leave this screen so that you can see these different proposals, maybe even the questions that were in the previous screen. But if there is anybody who would like to jump in now, please let me know. Let me just see, sorry. Okay. So I saw Irina, would you like to come in, share your thoughts from the chat? Irina? Okay, maybe she cannot hear us very well. Anybody else? I'm looking at the chat as well. Yes, Hannah, please, if you could maybe just let us know.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please, just if you could just introduce yourself to the group. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Hello, I am from Korea Institute of Science and Technology Information. And so my thoughts for future steps. In your recently published guide on open science infrastructure, there is statement that it should be harmonization of open science infrastructures and policies. So my suggestions basically address this statement. And so it can be nice to establish in the future maybe some kind of list index of existing tools, online tools that can assess open science infrastructures, how they are compliant with particular policies. And in my comment, I provided like 2 examples. One is very well known as a journal compliance tool provided by Coalition S. And the second one is a tool called DKNet. It assesses how biomedicine data repositories are compliant with fairness, fair principles. Even just a second, I can share some. There is also one paper which explains how this tool was designed. So basically all these compliance monitoring tools, they're designed based on decision tree software, decision tree models. So you need first for this a list of conditional questions designed according to particular policy requirements. So, and the second suggestion is like in the future, you can also design your own tool with a particular focus on on specific policies. For example, how Horizon Europe Open Access requirements can, how you map these requirements with repository characteristics. Because in model grant agreements, there is a requirement for trusted repositories. So which trusted repositories address this requirement?
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much for the suggestion. We'll have a look at that, maybe give you a call also to see in more details how that could be done and through which you know, looking into compliance with open science policies, and then how we could possibly develop such tools for assessments of compliance with different policy requirements. We would have to have a look at that. Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much.
There is also in the area of GDPR, general data protection regulation. Like if you just like to search, there are lots of examples because they design these days some like online tools how to assess particular systems compliance with GDPR. So it can be insights how it can shape this tool.
Okay, very well. Thank you very much. We'll definitely explore that a little bit more and see if this is something that we could indeed, again, as a group, do together for the future. Thank you. Joel, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to emphasize also what Irina raised, the task force, the core task force for multilingualism is basically what they're putting together and have already put together a vast list or very detailed lingualism can be enabled on a technical level. So also feeding back into the necessity to eventually, whenever capacity allows, to extend on what are the actual technical features we're looking at with all these resources that we're not collecting. And that's a great first step, just to mention that. But I wanted to take up on what you were asking earlier with the stock taking of the existing infrastructure in the various regions, which, so as in Africa, we have quite a few smaller also stock takings and opportunities now with the adoption of persistent identifiers, and then and there have been various stock taking initiatives done in the past. So the question I would ask back is, what role do you see UNESCO can play in engaging in these ongoing efforts and facilitating that as it happens? Like, can we use the UNESCO can we use the UNESCO label for also leveraging the participation during these efforts? Like, can collaborate, and I know that you've done this in the past, maybe co-organizing joint webinars where you also again present. I know this is a continuous and binding resources in each our teams, but like, what's the role that UNESCO can so how can we inform each other basically as we do the work on the ground, and then feeding into the indexing?
Great. So first on the part on multilingualism, I think this is something which is very important also for us. And you know that in every meeting that we go to with regards to open science infrastructures, etc., the question of multilingualism comes up very, very strongly. So when there are some advancements in the work that Irina and yourself were referring to, we would be very keen to understand how we can promote it further, or how we can use it for what we are doing also in our work as well. As for the regional initiatives, I mean, as you know, we have different field offices of UNESCO, and the idea is really that the work in the regions are done by the offices in the region, who also know the actors much better, the scene much better, the situations, the trends, the status of science systems and other systems in the regions and in different countries. So we usually work with our field offices in engaging in regional activities. And I think if there is anything where you feel like UNESCO's presence might be useful, as usual, you can always reach out to us, and then we will see with our colleagues in the field, and we will see what we can do together. We have done partnered with several African institutions and also organizations to promote open science on the continent. Of course, the African Open Science Platform is now our key partner, and I think when in particular we talk about Africa, I think African Open Science Platform really should be the one given the support to be able to kind of coordinate in a way the different activities across the continent on open science. And similarly, there is an idea of a creation of an Arab open science platform. I'm not sure where Asia is. I know that there are several initiatives mainly on open access in Asia, but it would be interesting to see indeed what is happening in different regions, and then how these things can come together.
Yeah, just to confirm, of course, like the AOSP, the African Open Science Platform is as we speak gearing up and preparing the facilitation on the ground of the region. So yeah.
Our idea is mainly, you know, how do we highlight the initiatives that are being undertaken already, and how do we, you know, we're still looking at these best practices for open science. We are still collecting them. The call is still open because we still need to get an idea of what is happening in different regions for different actors, for different disciplines, and then we really want to try to highlight some of the good practices and good initiatives that are happening on the ground that we would want to put a little bit more spotlight on for the future as well. Paige, sorry, you have your hand up also. Could you please just introduce yourself, please?
Hello, hi, thank you for calling on me. Nice to meet you, Anna, and the rest of the community here. Yeah, so I am a founder of a DAO, which is as a decentralized autonomous organization, and you can think of it as a research community, a sort of a community governed research community, but it's differentiated by the fact that it's everything is on the blockchain. So all of our coordination tools, all of our organization tools, no matter where you exist in the world, we coordinate our efforts on chain, and we find that the tools are actually highly efficient and useful for coordination. And so I raised my hand because I would love to see more dialogue between what we in the blockchain world are calling decentralized science, but what you guys have pioneered, you know, in as open science. And so I think decentralized science is just open science meets the blockchain. And it doesn't need to be seen as more complicated than there's just a new set of technology tools that facilitate open science and coordination among ecosystems. And I would, so because I'm entrenched in both worlds, I'm also a subcontractor on a NASA STEM education award. That's for my own private company, and I'm that's through the University of Hawaii. Although they did fund a lot of minority serving institutions this year, which is great. So I would love to see maybe as a start, perhaps more dialogue and information sharing between large institutions like UNESCO and a lot of the institutions that are represented on this call today. And this burgeoning and blossoming ecosystem, which we're sort of, well, which we're calling decentralized science. But I mean, there's DSci Africa, there's DSci Brazil. There was, you know, just a really big conference held in, well, there was DSci Boston in association with MIT in September, DSci San Francisco, DSci London. I'm trying to organize DSci Paris because I'm based in Paris. So the reason why I feel that this would be helpful in furthering these purposes of open science is because these tools that we're building on chain are they're so efficient in terms of furthering open science initiatives. They foster collaboration, but they also allow for intellectual property ownership assertion. And that's just at a very basic level. That's just at the publishing level. But in terms of actually coordinating large groups of people to do information sharing and create like a really vibrant hive mind, the tools are really useful. So I would love to put myself forward for sure as a liaison in that respect. but also as an information source, and to see how that it can be explored. I would, and I'll wrap up here, but I would like to, I'm sort of keen to liken this to, say, in the late or mid 90s, when people were kind of just starting to get used to the internet, you know, and going, well, how can this actually be useful? That's sort of how we see the Web3 tools today. We see them as these things that a lot of people, it's still kind of foreign to a lot of people, but it's going to make it's going to make everybody's life, it's just going to be the de facto use case tools in terms of information sharing. So that's why I personally would love to see more information sharing messaging, and I would love to liaise on that, in that aspect, with any organizations present here today.
Great, and thank you very much, Paige. And I see that there are also already some people in the chat responding positively to these proposals, and absolutely, I think it would be very useful to have a conversation and look into these new, not so new, emerging other technologies that really do allow for sharing of information, collaborations, etc. And maybe we can have a chat, and maybe we can have one of the next meetings dedicated also to discussing this connection between decentralized science, open science. What are the connections? What does that mean? And how that needs to be, you know, considered again for us in the context of the implementation of the recommendation. And again, looking into equity in access to these different technologies, in access to these different tools and infrastructures for sharing of information. So that's very good, and that's definitely something that we can, you know, think about for the future as well. I've seen also in the chat with regards to compliance mechanisms and tools that there are some things that are in the pipeline that are being developed already. So this is something that we would just have to have a look at to see, you know, what would, if any, be the role of this group and of UNESCO in looking into some of these things. I think the question of multilingualism is definitely something that we will have to have a look at, because there is a number of actions and provisions in the recommendation that look into multilingualism, and particularly when it comes to infrastructures. I think this is something that we should dedicate our attention to and provide some guidance to. So Irina, Joe, I think it was Kathleen, we'll come back to you on that, and we'll see if maybe that is also something that we can pick up for the next meetings of the group. Is there any other suggestion, any other comment? Anybody else who would like to say something? No? Okay, great. So I think we can stop here. We'll think about the different suggestions that we got through these different interventions today, and we will definitely leave you a little bit of time to reflect on this also within your communities, and come back to us with some additional proposals or suggestions. As I said, we are looking into where to bring this group next, and I think there are already a few good suggestions. So we will think about that, and we'll come back to the group with some suggestions for the next steps, substantive next steps that we have to do.
Hi, Anna. Before
yes,
can I have one question?
Yes, please go ahead.
You're not really.
Could you just introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my line is not that good. It's heavy rain here. Yeah, our weather is not that good. But can you all hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Yeah, I'm Susanna. I just want to ask, because
yes,
here on this one slide talking about the open science policies and strategies. Yeah, I just want to get clarification from UNESCO side. Are we going to have each country members for them to develop each open science for each country, Or are we going to look into the open science as because we thought open science is a public goods, you know? Are we coming out with one policy on open science? Because I try to look at every country, they have developed their open science, but it's quite difficult for me to gauge that information. So maybe I need some clarification from UNESCO side.
Yes, so what we are actually trying to also now map the different open science policies that exist in different countries. And actually that is going to be one of the first reportings that our member states have to do with regards to their implementation of the recommendation. So the idea would be indeed that every country does have a policy or a strategy or an action plan or a policy instrument on open science. It can be an umbrella open science policy or specific policies and specific policies for different elements of open science, depending on the country, of course. There are some several countries in some regions that might wish to have their strategies as sub-regional or regional strategies as well. But definitely the recommendation recommends creation of policies at the national level for open science. We've also produced in the policies working group the guide on the development of policies, and I would really suggest also that you, Susanna, you can join the policies working group, because discussions around what policy at what level, with how much details, etc., and compliance mechanisms are needed for different parts of open science.
Because maybe I would like to share, this is from the ASEAN side, because they just need a UNESCO clarification talking about the policy, because when we agree that this scientific knowledge is a public good, so it's like, you know, it's sharing of information. But when it comes to the industries from the private sector, you know, they always like how we want to ensure their contribution to this open science if we not address the commercialization value to the knowledge. So this is the thing that the policymakers is looking into that. If we talk about open science as a public good, for how long we want to agree that, you know, we're talking about sustainable, how long we can sustain. But because private and also like, you know, we're talking about open innovation. When talk about innovation, they're talking about commercialization. But open innovation is also part of the open science. So that is not clear declaration, not much, what they call it, information between open science and open innovation. So there's a little bit of declaration when it comes to the policy formulation. Yeah.
Yeah. These are definitely some of the challenges that, of course, countries are facing. And in some cases, what they are doing, what we've seen they are doing, is they actually have open science committees. They have built them with different actors, different stakeholders, including the private sector. And they're trying to develop their policies, taking into account the perspectives coming from these different actors. But again, every country has their own way of doing. What we can do is to provide some guiding principles or some guiding approaches, ways of doing things, and then we have to see what the different countries will also come up with.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Yes. Anybody else would like to add?
If I may jump in actually for a moment, Anna, on that question of commercialization. I agree that it's complicated. We are doing our best to prepare some guidance to show the linkages and how we can work together between the intellectual property right management system and the open science system. They're not completely at odds. I think this is an important factor, that open science does not need to prevent commercialization. For example, if we look at the open science hardware community, the OSHWA licenses, one of the conditions of making this open license is that you permit commercialization of the product later on. If someone wants to invest in the actual physical side of the hardware to produce it for somebody, they can recover their costs and perhaps even profit from that, even though the idea, the knowledge is freely shared, it's still possible to create a product. So it's not, and I think this is relevant for this group, for this infrastructures group as well. There's sometimes an expectation that anyone who's making money or recovering costs is in the wrong camp. But I do think that and we need to recognize the possibility for commercialization, the possibility to provide a product or a service for a subscription or for those who can pay, while sharing our knowledge openly, sharing the tools openly, sharing our open way of working, and making sure that the information and tools are available to those who cannot pay in order to ensure global equity. So let's not treat commercialization as completely at odds with every step of the open science process. Again, it's much more complicated than that, but I think that we should keep that as part of our conversation. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think the recommendation puts it forward exactly like that as well, so that there is a balance and a way of at the same time having open science and commercialization of science as well. Good. So I see in the chat the questions about how do we continue working together, and on that I will leave it to Ezra, because that's exactly the last session of the meeting. The idea for us is, of course, that there are further meetings. We communicate through emails. If the participants wish or think that there is need for another channel of communication that is needed between the meetings, we can definitely open that. We can see with the team what is the best way of working together. I know for the capacity building working group, I think we had Teams working group that we established. If that is something that the group would like to do, we can do that as well. Otherwise, we communicate through email, and then also in this quite regular meetings. But I'll maybe let Ezra go through the next steps, and then we see what we do for in the next future.
Great, thank you very much, Anna, and thank you, Tiffany. Maybe if we could just have the slides up again, please, just to show what we'll look at kind of is the practical next steps for the working group. Okay, so I mean the next kind of immediate steps are that we will share. I mean, Tiffany mentioned in the introduction some technical issues, but hopefully they will be solved quickly, and we'll share with you as soon as we can, and ideally by 15th of March, so by a week or so, 10 days time, something like that, the link for the index of the knowledge platforms. And then if we could please ask if you can provide some comments by the 25th of March, so 10 days after that. So to provide some initial comments, and the email address is there, openscience@unesco.org. And as Anna, I believe, mentioned, the aim is to launch this index. So once we've received the comments and, you know, edited, changed, whatever, according to the inputs, we are hoping to launch this index at the executive board, which is in May this year. And then, notwithstanding the final points about an additional platform or means to communicate if there's a need to do that. Otherwise, the next way we would do that, in addition to providing the feedback as mentioned here, is the next meeting, and we can decide on that. But I would imagine in a couple of months, so spring, early summer would be a reasonable time for us to do that. So we can make a proposal for that. So if we go to the next slide, please. This was certainly mentioned in the discussions, just the other working groups, and in my introduction I presented these 5. If you have an interest and are not already engaged and wish to participate in any of these other working groups, please let us know. The 2 which are currently scheduled are for the 15th of March for funding and incentives, and policies and policy instruments for the 3rd of April. But we'll get round, as I said, as certainly for this one and for the others to a next iteration or a next edition, let's say, of those working groups. Yeah, again, you can scan the QR codes. We'll share the presentation so you can see that. And yeah, so the Open Science Toolkit, it's been mentioned by myself and I think both colleagues on the call. So we urge you, if you haven't, if you don't have a copy, if you haven't downloaded these already, please do so. Many of you were part of the creation of these things, and they come together very well. They're being well appreciated. So please feel free to download and to share the link. And you know, we're continuing to work on these and adding additional elements, components of this as we go. So it's building. And yeah, thank you. Finally, as promised, the website address, the email address, the QR code that will take you straight there. Please find everything about open science, about the recommendation on our website, and please feel free to contact us for things specifically related to this working group, but any other questions as well. So with that, I will say thank you very much to everyone. Thank you very much for your interest, your continued interest, your new interest if you just joined us today. We very much appreciate all the discussions today, the inputs, the suggestions. We will also go through all the chat to make sure we haven't missed anything perhaps that was only in the chat and wasn't actually discussed. We'll make sure we capture that as well. And we look forward to continued discussions and inputs from you in the future. Thank you very much.